Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to wherever it is we are in the universe. Again, my name is Judge Donna Hecht. I'm supposed to tell the scoring attorneys to look at the two buttons at the lower left of their screen and turn off their audio and video, and keep those off until the trial ends. You should also have your video set to hide all non-video participants. So right now the screen looks the way it's supposed to look, which is great. Could the attorneys please make their appearances?
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Zakia Morris, and I represent the United States in its case against Kara Bassett. I have my second chair here, Ione Alvarado Jones, who will be assisting me in displaying the exhibits in today's case.
Thank you. Defense?
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is William Mueller, and I, along with my second chair, Cameron Corkett, represent the defense in today's case.
Good morning, Your
Thank
Honor.
you. Good morning. Then the first order of business is opening statements from each party. I'm supposed to tell you that everyone should be in speaker view. I guess that means I need to fix that as well on my computer. And attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking. So opening statements, starting with the people.
Your Honor, before the prosecution gives their opening statement, we would like to have a few preliminary matters that we would like to address by the court.
Of course.
First, we ask that all witnesses be constructively sequestered with the exception of the defendant in today's case, who is Kara Bassett, as per Rule 615B.
So ordered.
We also ask that all witnesses be constructively sworn in before trial.
So ordered.
We would like to bring to the court's attention that Evidentiary Rule 7 allows exhibits 4 through 33 be pre-admitted and available for use throughout this trial.
Understood.
And lastly, we would like to bring to the court's attention that ruling number 9 states that there is no need to identify the defendant in today's case, seeing as though they are not testifying today.
Understood. Are those all of your preliminary matters, Ms. Morris?
That is it for the people, Your Honor.
Then let me just check if Mr. Mueller has any preliminary matters. Mr. Mueller?
No more preliminary matters, Your Honor.
Very good. So now opening statement.
Yes, Your Honor, if you allow me to adjust my camera.
Whatever works.
May it please the court. Dream, dissatisfaction, disappearance. Members of the jury, those 3 words describe everything that you need to know about today's case. Today, you will hear the story of a woman by the name of Kara Bassett. Now, that woman had a dream to save elephants. In the summer of 2017, you will hear how the defendant became so dissatisfied with waiting for that dream to become a reality that she murdered the one person standing in her way, her husband, Don Clark. You also hear the gruesome details of what happened August 18th and all the things that the defendant did to make her husband disappear. Good morning, members of the jury. My name is Zakia Morris, and I proudly represent the United States in its case against Kara Bassett. Now, today is we, the prosecution, who bears the burden of proof. We have to prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In order to do so, we must prove to you 2 things. First, that the defendant did in fact murder Don Clark, and second, that she did so intentionally with premeditation. That is so to say that she murdered him with malice aforethought. Members of the jury, we will easily meet our burden, and we will do so by providing evidence that supports those 3 words. Dream, dissatisfaction, disappearance. First, the defendant's dream. You will see video footage from the defendant where she says that she is steaming over the way her husband was talking to her about the elephant park. The defendant was married to a rich businessman by the name of Don Clark, who put his desire for money before his wife's passion to save the elephants. Now, you will hear how the defendant and Mr. Clark opened the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park in Tallahassee, Florida. You also hear how the defendant was very upset with the way this park was being structured and treated. It was being ran like a zoo. instead of the sanctuary that Mr. Clark promised her. Now, you will also see that the defendant was very violent towards Don Clark. On our cross-examination of Joe Young, he will testify as to how he had to turn off his camera footage because of how violent the defendant was. Second, let's talk about the defendant's dissatisfaction. You will also hear that the defendant often argued with her husband over the way the elephant park was being ran, even throwing a vase at his head. We will show you evidence that Miss Bassett planned to kill Don Clark. From our direct examination of Agent Seth Branham, you will hear how Miss Bassett had convinced her husband on May 1st of 2017, just 3 months before she murdered him, to put a disappearance clause in his power of attorney, to which he signed over to her. So she wouldn't have to wait long to acquire all of his assets, everything that he owned, his money, his cars, his airplane, all of his real estate properties in that very same elephant park that the defendant longed to own would all belong to her if Don Clark were just to no longer live or simply disappear. You will also hear about Don Clark's disappearance, how the defendant caused it. You will hear how a vial of carfentanil went missing from the elephant park's premises and how the defendant had access to that carfentanil. Members of the jury, at the end of this trial, I'm going to stand before you one last time, actually render a fair and just verdict of guilty against the defendant, Kara Bassett. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Morris. Opening statement for the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to proceed?
Please.
May it please the court. It's easy to listen to the story that the government just told you and buy into what they're saying. A story of a vengeful wife who killed her husband is intriguing. But the only problem is that once we look at what they're really asking you to believe, you'll see it's just as impossible as it is compelling. See, today you're going to learn that the government is asking you to believe that Miss Bassett killed her husband, put his body into a van, drove that van to the swamp, and dumped his body there. But a moment ago, Miss Morris chose not to tell you that Miss Bassett would have had just 3 minutes to commit this crime. See, today we're going to show you a text sent by Mr. Clark at 11:14 p.m. But you'll learn that the van they're alleging Miss Bassett drove to the swamp left 3 minutes later at 11:17. Miss Bassett, who you'll learn is 13 inches shorter than Mr. Clark, would have had just 3 minutes to kill him, put his body into a van. 3 minutes to wipe her traces so well that the FBI could never find evidence that links her to this crime. And today you're going to learn that she would have had to have hidden his body so well that the FBI themselves could never find it. Members of the jury, they're presenting you with an impossible crime, and they're ignoring reasonable possibilities. So I want to take a look at some possibilities, specifically 3 things: the clause, the cache, and the call. First, the clause. Now we're going to show you a form that was signed by Mr. Clark and Miss Bassett that said in an emergency, Miss Bassett could access his assets. Essentially, it's a will. Now, a moment ago, the government tried to tell you that the reason this form was created was because the defendant was planning to kill her husband, but you'll learn the real reason this form was created, and specifically that disappearance clause that Miss Morris mentioned, was because Don Clark was doing shady business with men in Costa Rica, and they wanted to add that clause in case he disappeared. 4 months later, he disappeared. Next, the cache. When we cross-examine the government's witness, Steph Branham, we're going to show you that Don Clark was doing business in Costa Rica using cash off the books, that he was planning to move assets to Costa Rica, and that he did not want Miss Bassett to find out. 2 weeks later, he disappeared. And lastly, the call. We're going to bring a witness to the stand named Joe Young, a TV producer who was filming a documentary on the elephant park. And what Joe Young will tell you is that the day Mr. Clark went missing, he got a text from an unlisted number in Costa Rica. You'll learn that he then called that number and spoke to them on the phone for 52 minutes, just a few hours before he disappeared. Now, today, the government assumes a burden to prove the defendant's guilt to you beyond a reasonable doubt, meaning the defendant's presumed innocent until they can prove there isn't a single alternate reasonable explanation. But members of the jury, there are too many possibilities at play. What kind of business was Mr. Clark doing that led to the addition of that clause? Is it possible those shady men had something to do with his disappearance? Why was he doing business using cash off the books? Is it possible that his business caught up to him? Why did he take that call the day he disappeared? Why was he scared by the person on the other end? How would the defendant commit this crime in just 3 minutes, ladies and gentlemen? You see, the government, they won't be able to answer a single one of those questions. They're presenting you with an impossible crime and ignoring reasonable possibilities. That's why at the end of this trial, I'll ask you to find the defendant not guilty. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Mueller. I am supposed to tell everyone to switch to gallery view, including me. And the government may call their first witness.
Yes, Your Honor, the government calls Agent Staub to the witness stand. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Whenever you're ready.
Good morning. May you please introduce yourself to the court?
Good morning. My name is Steph Branham. I'm a senior agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigations with a specialty in violent crimes.
Now, how did you become involved in this case, Agent Branham?
I was involved in this case after the disappearance of Don Clark, which was reported by Kara Bassett, and I immediately took over as lead investigator on the search of the Elephant Park, the airport, and Big Gum Swamp.
Now, you just mentioned that you searched the Elephant Park. Did you find anything particularly of note in that search?
Yes, the main thing that we noted when we searched the Elephant Park was that they had a shed of a medication called carfentanil, and that shed, one carfentanil vial was missing.
Now, can you tell the court what carfentanil is?
Carfentanil is a Schedule II substance that is regulated by federal law.
Agent Branham, how do you know what carfentanil is?
Well, I uncovered a material safety data sheet during the process of my investigation.
Is this that material safety data sheet?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And what does this MSDS sheet tell you?
Well, it tells me that carfentanil is 5,000 times more stronger than heroin. It also tells me that carfentanil can cause physical harm and even death to human beings.
How did you know that a vial of carfentanil was missing, Agent Branham?
As required by federal law, the park maintained a logbook.
Now, I had that logbook on the screen. Now, can you tell the court what this logbook says?
Well, this logbook says that there was supposed to be 24 vials in the shed. But when we uncovered it and when we searched the property, there was only 23 vials.
And according to the logbook, who had access to and used the carfentanil at the Elephant Park? Excuse me.
Well, the employees of the park. So that would be Nate Garson, Kelsey Stebbins, and Kara Clark, who goes by the initial CC on the logbook.
Now, I'd like to continue talking to you about the carfentanil logbook. Who was the last person to have access to carfentanil?
It looks to me, based on the logbook, that it was Miss Kara Clark, who is now Kara Bassett.
And did you make any other observations when observing this log?
Yes, ma'am, we did. So each time a vial of carfentanil was logged out of the shed, there was always a reason for it. So the reason was always because one of the elephants was either sick or one of the elephants was hurting. However, you can see on the last one that it was not checked out for any elephant.
Now, was there anything else missing from the Elephant Park?
Yes, ma'am. There was a Cessna plane and the park's van that was missing from the Elephant Park when we searched it.
Now, we're looking at the photos of these two vehicles. Were you able to locate these two vehicles?
Yes, ma'am. We found these vehicles at the Cary Bell Leon Airport, and we immediately went to go search the van. And when we searched the van, we uncovered graphical positioning data, or GPS data, inside of the van.
And what did this GPS data's information provide you?
The GPS data located in the van's event data recorder told us that the van was in motion from 11:17 at night to 1:26 in the morning, and it went to Big Gum Swamp. And then it remained stationary at Big Gum Swamp from 1:26 in the morning to 2:10 in the morning. Then from 2:10 in the morning to 4 a.m., it went back to the Carrie Bell Leon Airport.
Did you find any other valuable information from this van?
Yes, ma'am, we did. We found 6 hairs in the back of the van, and the forensics team tested these hairs and found that they were Don Clark's.
Did you find anything else?
Yes, ma'am. We also found algae inside of the van. We found it on the acceleration and the brakes.
And what did you do upon finding this algae?
Well, we wanted to test reference sources. So we went back to the park and looked for things with algae on it. We found the boots and we found a wheelchair. And then we went to go test the swamp for that same algae as well.
Are these the boots and the wheelchair that you found algae on?
Yes, ma'am. We found those at the Greater Elephant Tallahassee Park.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you tested samples of these algae from your forensics team. Now, Ms. Alvarado-Jones, could you please display that report? Now, is this the forensics report that you were referring to?
Yes, ma'am. This is what I was handed over by my forensics team.
And what was the main conclusion of this forensics report?
Well, the main conclusion from this report is the algae that was on the boots and was on the wheelchair and inside of the van, we could determine that it was probably from the Big Gum Swamp. We could determine this because of the Redfield ratio, or the ratio of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus atoms in that algae's atomic structure.
Now I'd like to switch gears. Why did you arrest Kara Bassett?
Well, we only arrest people when we have enough probable cause to. So we developed probable cause when we uncovered a letter from Mandy Tuminelli and the power of attorney.
Are these the two documents that you just mentioned?
Yes, ma'am, they are.
First, Agent Branham, I'd like to discuss the power of attorney. Now, why did you review this document?
Well, it was written on May 1st of 2017, sort of close to the date of disappearance. We also looked at the clauses of the effective date, and we found that the disappearance clause, which is subsection 2, was irregular.
You also mentioned that you reviewed a letter from Mandy Tuminelli.
Yes, ma'am.
Why did you review this letter? And how did it aid you in your investigation? Excuse me.
Well, this aided my investigation in 2 ways. The first way is that we found out that Kara Bassett alone forced that disappearance trigger clause into the will. The second way that we use this to aid in our investigation is we found out that Mr. Clark filed a petition for protection or a restraining order against Ms. Bassett.
Ms. Alvarado-Jones, could you please take that exhibit off of the screen? Your Honor, I would like to have the witness view an exhibit for identification purposes.
Okay.
Now, Agent Branham, could you please open up your notebook to exhibit 34?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Is that the, excuse me,
Yes, ma'am, I've reviewed it.
is that the restraining order that you just mentioned?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
Yes.
Your Honor, the prosecution moves to have exhibit 34 entered into evidence.
Any objection, Mr. Mueller?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd object to hearsay within hearsay pursuant to 805.
I'm going to need to look at exhibit 34, if you'll give me a moment. So this is not covered by the ruling that certain exhibits are admissible. I don't remember the range of exhibit numbers that covered. Is this included or not?
No, Your Honor.
I understand. Okay. Well, yes, I'm going to need you to respond to that, Ms. Morris.
Your Honor, we are not using this exhibit for the truth of the matter asserted, but rather the subsequent action. As Agent Branham just stated, after reviewing this exhibit, he arrested Kara Bassett. We're giving the court a bit more insight as to why he arrested Kara Bassett.
Anything further, Mr. Mueller?
Yes, Your Honor. In that case, I contend that opposing counsel can do that without offering an exhibit that has 3 layers of hearsay into evidence. He can certainly talk, and I believe he already testified that a restraining order was filed against Ms. Bassett, and he can leave it there. They don't need to enter an entire exhibit with 3 different layers of hearsay to prove that point. It's only helpful and it's only relevant to offer this exhibit into evidence if they're using it for the truth of the matter asserted.
There's a pretrial ruling. I don't remember. Does it cover whether there was probable cause for the arrest?
Yes, it does.
Then sustained.
Now, Ms. R.L. Jones, could you please display exhibit, oh, excuse me. Could you, all right. So, Agent Branham, what does this restraining order cover?
Well, that covers what Don Clark's request to the court for protection against Miss Bassett.
Could you please read the highlighted section of that restraining order?
Didn't we sustain a hearsay objection to that?
Oh, excuse me, Your Honor. Excuse me, Your Honor. Now, why did you arrest Kara Bassett?
Well, we arrested Kara Bassett once we had probable cause for the murder charge. We needed a motive, which came from the letter and the power of attorney. And then we needed the facts, which come from the algae and the missing carfentanil vial.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Us.
Your Honor, before I begin, actually, permission to read a stipulation onto the record.
Go ahead.
Stipulation 20 in the pretrial orders, it says that Don Clark was 6'5" and Kara Bassett is 5'4".
Got it.
Good morning, Agent Branham.
Good morning.
I want to pick up right where you left off on direct examination. A moment ago, you said that you believe Miss Bassett killed Don Clark. Isn't that true?
Yes, that is correct.
I want to take a look at some of the details of the crime that would have to be true. Okay? So you know that Miss Bassett is 5'4", isn't that true?
Yes, sir.
And you know that Don Clark is 6'5", right?
Yes, sir.
You would agree with me that that's a 13-inch height difference, isn't that true?
Yes, sir.
So Agent Branham, what you're telling the members of the jury is that Miss Bassett would have been able to kill someone 13 inches taller than her, right?
Yes, sir. I am.
Objection, Your Honor.
What is the legal nature of your objection?
The prosecution objects to speculation.
Have
Your
you heard
response,
me?
Mr. Mueller? Yes.
Yes, Your Honor. These are the witness's own conclusions that he testified on direct, and then he just confirmed on cross-examination. That Miss Bassett was 5'4", that Don Clark was 6'5", that there's a 13-inch height difference. And so it's true that if she killed him, she would have killed someone who was 13 inches taller than her.
Anything further, Ms. Morris?
Your Honor, I still stand by my objection. They're asking the witness to speculate as to because she was 13 inches taller, that would be the reasoning for her murdering Don Clark, or a factor inside of it.
It seems to be within the realm, not necessary. It seems to be within the realm of even a layperson's opinion. So I'm going to overrule that objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Agent Branham, you'd agree with me that Miss Bassett would have had to have killed someone 13 inches taller than her, right?
Yes, sir, I do.
You believe that Miss Bassett put Mr. Clark's body in a van, isn't that true?
Yes, sir, with the assistance of a wheelchair.
But she would have had to have put the body of someone 13 inches taller than her in that wheelchair, isn't that true?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
All right, Agent Branham, now you talked on direct examination about GPS records that showed a van went to a swamp, right?
Yes, sir, I did.
You believe it's there that Miss Bassett dumped Don Clark's body, right?
Yes, sir, because we found algae on the wheelchair.
Now, Agent Branham, you'd agree with me that you searched that swamp thoroughly, right?
Yes, we did. We ordered canvas dogs and gave them Don Clark's scent. We searched it thoroughly.
Agent Branham, you never found the body, isn't that true?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
You're familiar with Exhibit 20, right?
Yes, sir.
It's a text sent from Mr. Clark's phone, isn't that true?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And looking at the timestamp on the document, it says Friday, August 18th, 11:14 p.m. Isn't that true?
Yes, that is what the message says.
And the text message says going out for a while, right?
Correct.
Now, Agent, I'm looking for an exact time here. When did the van leave the park?
The van left the park at 11:17 p.m.
So, Agent Branham, to be clear, from 11:14, when that text was sent from Mr. Clark's phone, to 11:17, when the van left the park, that's a 3-minute time span. Isn't that true?
Yes, that's a 3-minute time interval.
All right, Agent. Now, you're familiar with Exhibit 4, right? I believe you talked about it on direct.
Yes, sir, I am.
This is that letter from Mandy Tuminelli, right?
Correct.
I want to take a look at some highlighted portions. Here it says that a disappearance clause, the clause you were mentioning on direct examination, right?
Yes, it does mention that disappearance clause.
The first part of the sentence, it says on May 1st, 2017. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir.
Agent, you would agree with me that 4 months before Mr. Clark disappeared, a disappearance clause was added to his power of attorney. Isn't that true?
Yes, I would agree with that statement.
And looking at this next line, you'd agree with me that the reason was that Mr. Clark was doing business with men in Costa Rica. Isn't that true?
That's what Mandy Tuminelli says? Yes.
Looking at the next highlighted portion, here it says that Mr. Clark planned to do business using cash off the books. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir, that's what Mandy Tuminelli told us.
Agent Branham, you don't know exactly what that money off the books was going to buy, do you?
That is correct. I don't know the value of that money or what it was used for.
Here it says that Mr. Clark said Miss Bassett was unaware of this purchase and should remain unaware, right?
Yes, that is what that letter says.
Agent Branham, you don't know why that is, do you?
Why what is? I'm sorry?
Why Miss Bassett wasn't meant to know.
I am not aware of why Miss Bassett wasn't meant to know.
And lastly, it says in the next highlighted portion that Mr. Clark was planning to transfer a large portion of his assets to Costa Rica. Isn't that true?
Yes, but the next line says he never did.
Right, but Agent Branham, you don't know what assets he was planning to move to Costa Rica, do you?
That is a correct statement.
Right, but I want to talk about something that you were able to find evidence of. You know that Mr. Clark took a phone call the day he disappeared. Isn't that true?
Yes, he did. He did take a phone call.
You know that that phone call was with a number in Costa Rica. Isn't that true?
That is a true statement.
Agent Branham, to be clear, you don't know who the person on the other end of that phone call was, do you?
No, I don't. It was a no caller ID.
It was a no caller ID, but it was from Costa Rica. Isn't that true?
That is correct, sir.
There's an unlisted number there?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. Briefly. Agent Branham, why didn't you investigate him in Costa Rica?
Well, the United States has no jurisdiction over Costa Rica, but I did contact the Costa Rican police, and they checked Clark's property in Costa Rica, but it was vacant. They couldn't find him at all. I also spoke to operators at the Costa Rican airports, and they hadn't seen or spoken with Don since earlier that summer.
No further questions.
Thank you. May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor. No recross.
Is
Yes, Your
recross,
Honor,
is recross allowed? They told me yesterday it was not allowed.
Oh,
No,
I
Your
believe it was, but I'm not planning to do one.
Understood. Thank you. You are excused. The prosecution may call their next witness.
Your Honor, the prosecution rests.
Very good. Then the defense may call its first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Joe Young to the stand. May I proceed?
Whenever you're ready.
Good morning, Mr. Young.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Sure. Hi, my name is Joe Young.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Young?
Well, I'm a television producer, but I really specialize in documentaries. I like to capture things about animals or the environment. In fact, my latest project is a documentary about slugs. It's called How Slow They Can Go.
Mr. Young, do you know the defendant in this case, Kara Bassett?
Yeah, sure. I know Kara. We're like best pals. I was actually filming a documentary about her.
And do you know who Don Clark is?
Yes, that's Kara Bassett's ex-husband. I also filmed him for my documentary.
Agent, I want to talk about your time at the park. Were you there often?
Yeah, sure. I was there, 5 days a week for about 2 years.
Did you ever see Miss Bassett and Mr. Clark interact?
Yes.
Did you ever see them get into any physical fights?
From what I saw, I never saw them get into physical fights.
Did you ever see one of them threaten to hurt the other physically?
Nope.
And how would you describe their relationship?
Well, they seem like a loving couple from what I saw.
All right, I want to talk about August 18th. Were you at the park that day?
Yes, I was.
Did you see Miss Bassett at all?
Yeah, she was there working at the elephant park.
Did you speak with her that day?
Yeah, I did some interviews for my documentary.
Would you say that she was acting out of the ordinary during those interviews, Mr. Young?
Not really, no. She seemed like her usual self.
Did she mention to you that she was planning anything?
No.
Did she complain about Mr. Clark at all?
No, I don't think so.
Mr. Young, in your time at the park, did you ever see the defendant wear a pair of boots?
Yes, I did.
Are those her boots? Do those look like her boots on the screen? Excuse me.
Yes, those are Kara's boots.
Mr. Young, were they muddy when you saw her wear them?
Well, yeah, she would always walk around in the elephant park with them.
I want to talk a little bit more about August 18th. Did you see Mr. Clark that day?
Well, yeah, sure. I was filming him for my documentary.
Did you have any conversations?
Yeah, I had a couple.
Could you just tell us about that?
Well, there was one particular interview that was interesting. It was around 6 p.m., I think.
What happened in that conversation?
Well, I was talking to him about the elephant park for my interview, but all of a sudden he got a text message or something on his phone and his face went white.
What happened after his face went white, Mr. Young?
He started getting all nervous looking, and then he told me he had to deal with something and he left.
So did Mr. Clark offer you any explanation as to what that text was?
No, he just said he had to deal with something and he left.
Mr. Young, are you familiar with Exhibit 21?
Yes, this is a call log of Don Clark's phone records.
Do you remember what time you had that conversation you were just talking to us about?
Yeah, it was around 6 p.m.
Objection, Your Honor, to lack of foundation.
Can you respond, Mr. Oh, well, tell me what you think is lacking.
Your Honor, there has been no foundation laid that the witness knows about this document or that they have knowledge on the document in total.
Your response, Mr. Mueller?
Yes, sir. I believe I just asked Mr. Young if he was familiar with the document. I can certainly ask a follow-up question to clarify whether or not he's familiar with its contents, but I believe the foundation's been laid.
Your
Well,
Honor,
go ahead.
Your Honor, for that exact reason, the foundation has not been laid. We do not know how he knows of this document, when he reviewed it. So that's the foundation I'm asking to be laid.
Okay. Well, we have a somewhat unusual procedural situation in this trial where documents that happen to contain a great deal of hearsay and other material have been stipulated to have been ruled to be admissible. Now, this witness, as far as I can tell, could not possibly authenticate this document. Certainly the foundation that he can authenticate this document has not been laid. However, the document is not only admissible, but has already been admitted. I think it's appropriate, at least not inappropriate, to ask him to read what it says. He's a person literate in English and he can read what it says. I don't think he needs a foundation for that. And that's really all the question called for. So in most trials, Ms. Morris, you'd have a good point, but given that particular procedural quirk here, I think he can be asked to read it. He can't really interpret it. That might be a step too far, but that particular objection to that particular question is rather long-windedly overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Young, you mentioned that you spoke with Mr. Clark at 6 p.m. Do you see any text on this document from around that time?
Yes, number 7 and 8. Those were also sent at 6 p.m. on that day.
Can you look, who were they sent by?
I don't know. It just says an unlisted number in Costa Rica.
Now looking at where it shows the call log on this exhibit, do you see any calls from that same number?
Yes, call number 4. It was a 52-minute outgoing call to that same number in Costa Rica.
And what time?
6 p.m.
Right, Mr. Young, I want to shift gears for a moment and talk about your involvement in the FBI's investigation. Were you ever interviewed by the FBI?
Yeah, they interviewed me a couple times.
How much would you say they spoke to you?
Not very much.
Did they ask you a lot of questions about your conversation with Mr. Clark that day?
No, they didn't ask me a lot of questions, no.
You mentioned earlier you were filming a documentary on the elephant zoo. Do you have any footage?
Yes, I actually have 2,000 hours of it.
Did you ever show it to the FBI?
No, they didn't even ask to see it.
All right, Mr. Young. Now you mentioned that phone call, a moment ago you mentioned that the phone call was from a number in Costa Rica. Do you know anything relating to Don Clark in Costa Rica?
Well, I know he made frequent trips to Costa Rica, if that's what you mean.
Did you ever go yourself?
Yes, in June of 2018, I did my own little private investigation to Costa Rica to look for him.
Did you find anything when you went to Costa Rica?
Well, yes, I went to the one house I knew he had on Hermosa Beach. I got in, but there was something strange about the house.
Object, Your Honor, to speculation as to how the witness knows that that house that he visited in Hermosa Beach was Don Clark's.
Mueller?
May I be heard, Your Honor? I believe he testified that he knew Don Clark had a vacation home. But again, I can certainly ask a question just to clarify that for the court.
Yes, at this point, we'll accept that he went to a house and he found something strange about it, but I will sustain the objection and strike the portion saying that it was in fact Don Clark's house.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Young, do you know that home, do you know whose it was?
Yes, that was Don Clark's home. I mean, I saw his clothes in the closet.
How do you know that was his home?
I saw his clothes in the closet, things like that. I knew it was Don's.
I believe you were
Your
telling us.
Honor,
Yes?
I would like to re-raise my objection to speculation. Just because there were clothes found in the closet, the foundation has not been laid that he knows that those were Don Clark's clothes. And even if they were his clothes, that does not lay enough foundation for it to have been his house.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
I think that's something that you can certainly argue to the jury, Ms. Morris, but it's a rational conclusion. Okay, he's seen Don Clark for thousands of hours. He's probably seen a lot of Don Clark's clothes, and he said he recognized those clothes. So we have that. It's a rational conclusion from that it was Don Clark's house. You are free to cross-examine about whether he saw other people's clothes in there, whether he recognized all the clothes in there, whether he saw anything else of Don Clark's in the house. You're free to argue to the jury that that's a pretty thin reed to lay that conclusion on. But I think it's a rational conclusion. I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Young, could you go back? I believe you were telling us about what you found when you went to that home.
Yeah, there was just this strange feeling. I mean, the fan was on. The whole house was completely clean, spotless.
Did the FBI, did you ever tell them about this?
No, they never interviewed me about my trip to Costa Rica.
Right, Mr. Young, now I want to ask you one last thing. Do you believe that the defendant would murder Don Clark?
No, I don't.
Objection, Your Honor, to ultimate issue. The witness cannot speak on the ultimate issue in today's case.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
I'd appreciate it.
So Rule 704, the opinion on the ultimate issue rule that opposing counsel is referring to, actually permits a witness to give an opinion on the ultimate issue. It says that it's not automatically objectionable. Specifically, the only time it's inadmissible is when an expert witness in a criminal case is testifying to the defendant's state of mind. So for example, if we tendered Mr. Young as an expert and he then went on to make the conclusion that Ms. Bassett was legally insane, that would be prohibited under the rule. But the rule itself actually permits an opinion on the ultimate issue.
Understood. I'm going to sustain the
If I may respond.
I'm going to sustain your objection, Ms. Morris.
Oh, Oh, yes,
Okay.
sorry, excuse me.
Don't snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, as my boss used to say. I'm going to sustain the objection. I understand your argument about the rule, Mr. Mueller. It's not at all clear, however, that this witness has an adequate foundation for that opinion. I think I'm not depriving you of much. I think you can ask him the following question, or some version of it if you so desire. I'm not going to make you. Do you have any reason to think that Kara Bassett did not commit this crime, or that Kara Bassett is not guilty? And he can then tell you as much of the foundation of his opinion as exists. And again, the jury can draw the ultimate conclusion, which I think is Ms. Morris's point, that it should be up to the jury to do that. So he can state the basis, whatever basis he has for the conclusion, but not the conclusion itself. I don't think I'm restricting you very much, but that's my ruling.
Yes, Your Honor, of course. Mr. Young, do you have any reason to believe, based on your time spent at the park with Miss Bassett, that she would kill Mr. Clark?
No, from what I observed, I didn't see any reason for Kara to kill Don.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Your Honor, I have nothing further at this time.
Cross.
Yes, Your Honor, if you allow me to readjust my camera.
Absolutely.
May I proceed?
Please.
Good afternoon, well, good morning, excuse me. Good afternoon, Mr. Young. I'd like to begin my examination by discussing Don Clark and Kara Bassett's relationship.
Sure.
Now, you would say that you knew them both very well.
That's right. I mean, I saw them every day for about 2 years.
And initially, you said that their relationship was mostly great, isn't that right?
Yes, their relationship seemed to be in a good place.
But shortly thereafter, you admit that they would argue over the Elephant Park, isn't that right?
Yeah, now that you mention it, there were a couple times they argued.
Now, this was because Don Clark saw the Elephant Park as a business, isn't that right?
Well, yeah, some of the arguments were about their business.
Your Honor, I would like the witness to view an exhibit for identification purposes.
Okay.
Mr. Young, could you please open up your notebook to exhibit 36?
Yes, I have it.
Now, that's the video that you recorded of Miss Bassett in June of 2017, isn't that right?
Yes, I believe it was June 15th.
Now, that's a fair and accurate copy of that video?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, the prosecution moves to have exhibit 36 entered into evidence.
Any objection?
Without objection, Your Honor.
It's admitted.
Ms. Arroyo-Jones, if you could play that exhibit for the jury.
Oh, I'm steaming. This is a business, not a charity. As long as it's my money, we'll run it that way. That's what Don said to me. Can you believe that? We'll see how this ends.
Now, Mr. Young, in this video, Miss Bassett says that she is steaming over the way her husband was talking to her about the Elephant Park. Isn't that right?
Yes, I believe that's what she was talking about.
She even says, we'll see how this ends, correct?
Yes.
Now, you witnessed Don Clark and Kara Bassett fight at times, didn't you?
Yes, there were a few times I saw them argue with each other.
Now I'd like to talk to you about some of those fights. Now, you mentioned earlier that you recorded over 2,000 hours worth of footage. Is that right?
That's correct. It's all part of my documentary.
But isn't it also true that Miss Bassett made you turn off and erase camera footage?
Yes, sometimes that would happen.
And this was the footage of her arguing with Don Clark, isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct.
You even saw Kara Bassett throw a vase at Don Clark's head during one of these times, is that right?
Yes, there was one time she threw a vase towards his head. It smashed against the wall.
But nonetheless, she threw a vase towards his head?
Yes, that's true.
Your Honor, I would like the witness to view another exhibit for identification purposes.
Understood?
Mr. Young, if you would open your notebook to exhibit 38.
Yes, I have it.
Now, this is another video you took of Kara Bassett in June of 2017, isn't that right?
That's correct. It's from the same day.
And it's a fair and accurate copy of that video? Your Honor, the prosecution moves to have Exhibit 38 entered into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
It's admitted.
Ms. Arvell Jones, could you please play that exhibit?
People look at me and they think I'm sweet and nice. Go on. Keep underestimating me. I will lobby senators. I will protest big businesses. I will get in your face. I will take people to their grave if I have to. I will do anything to protect these elephants.
Now, Mr. Young, in this video, Ms. Bassett says that she would take people to their graves. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's what she said.
And she said it was in order to protect those elephants?
Yes, she cared very deeply about those elephants.
And now I'd like to talk to you about what you witnessed after Don Clark was gone. Now, you said that you thought it was a bit weird that Ms. Bassett didn't call or text him during the time of his disappearance, didn't you?
Yes, when I was shown the phone records, it did seem a little odd to me.
And now you witnessed Ms. Bassett make sweeping changes to the elephant park, isn't that right?
Yes, after his disappearance, she changed the park from more of a business style to more of a sanctuary.
Ms. Bassett got rid of all of the park's employees?
That's correct. They all became volunteers.
And she took the elephants out of the elephant cages?
That's correct.
She finally turned the elephant sanctuary into an elephant park after Mr. Clark was gone.
An
elephant park into an elephant sanctuary, excuse me.
Yes, that's correct.
I would like to have the witness view another, final exhibit for identification purposes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Mr. Young, may you please turn your notebook to Exhibit 42?
Yes, I have it.
Now, that's the video that you took of Ms. Bassett in September of 2017, isn't that right?
I believe so, yes.
And it's a fair and accurate copy of that video?
It is.
Your Honor, the prosecution moves to have Exhibit 42 entered into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
It's admitted.
Ms. R.L. Jones, could you please display Exhibit 42?
Hi there, all you cool calves and pachyderms. Kara Bassett here with a big announcement. I'm turning this park into a sanctuary. For too long, it's been a zoo, a tourist attraction, but now it's going to be a place where we save baby elephants who have been orphaned or injured. It's what I've always wanted, and it's what Don would have wanted.
Now, this video was recorded 2 months after Don Clark was declared missing, isn't that right?
Yes, that sounds right.
And you're aware that Ms. Bassett remarried a year after he was declared dead? Well, the day that he was declared dead? Excuse me.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
No further questions for this witness at this time, Your Honor.
Redirect?
Brief redirect, Your Honor. Mr. Young, opposing counsel just mentioned that footage of arguments were deleted. Would you have any reason to include footage of arguments in your documentary?
No, not really. The focus wasn't really on their relationship. It was more about the elephant business and how it was run.
And finally, Mr. Young, the week of August 18th, and specifically, or excuse me, the week after Mr. Clark went missing, did you see Ms. Bassett then?
Yes, I still did my interviews during that week.
Based off those interviews and your time spent with her, how did she seem to you that week?
I mean, she seemed devastated. She couldn't find her husband.
Your Honor, objection. This is out of scope of my cross-examination.
Mr. Mueller?
Your Honor, I believe opposing counsel is talking about statements. They entered exhibits talking, eliciting statements talking about how the defendant would take people to their grave, that she'd do anything to protect the elephants, that Ms. Bassett would get into arguments with Mr. Clark. And so this is going to rebut the claim that she was angry with him.
That objection is overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Young, how did she seem to you after Mr. Clark went missing?
Yeah, like I said, she just seemed full of grief, devastated.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Nothing further, Your Honor.
So as I am now informed, you could do recross, Ms. Morris. Do you wish to?
No recross needed, Your Honor.
Then can this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor, I believe so.
Thank you for coming in today, Mr. Young. You are excused. The defense may call its next witness.
Your Honor, the defense, excuse me.
Your Honor, the defense rests.
Everybody rest. I get the idea. Very good. Then the case is closed to evidence. I'm supposed to direct everyone to switch back to speaker view. That includes me. And I'm also supposed to tell the scoring attorneys that since both witnesses have finished their testimony, you can complete the witness portion of your ballot. Now I'll hear closing arguments, starting with the United States.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court.
Please.
Dream, dissatisfaction, disappearance. Members of the jury, at the beginning of today's trial, I told you that those three words would explain why the defendant murdered her husband. And while nothing we do can bring back Mr. Clark, we can provide his family justice, and we can make sure that his murderer goes to prison where she rightfully should be. At the beginning of this trial, I also told you that it was we, the prosecution, who bore the burden of proof. We had to prove to you the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In order to do so, we had to prove to you two things. First, that the defendant, Kara Bassett, murdered her husband, Don Clark. And second, that she did so with malice aforethought. That is so to say that she murdered him with intention and premeditation. Members of the jury, we met our burden. And we did so by providing evidence that supports those three words: dream, dissatisfaction, disappearance. First, let's review what you heard about the defendant's dream. You heard from our cross-examination of the defense's witness, Joe Young, about how often the defendant would argue with her husband over the elephant park. We showed you video footage where the defendant says that she was steaming over the way this park was being ran and structured. Don Clark told the defendant that as long as the park was being ran with his money, it would be ran his way. And this struck the defendant's very core. You could see it on her face. The defendant existed to save elephants. And soon she realized that Don Clark was the main obstacle standing in her way. She knew that so long as he lived, she would not be the owner of that elephant park, and she sought to change that, so she did. Second, let's review what you heard about the defendant's dissatisfaction. You also heard from our cross-examination of the defense's Joe Young about how he had to turn off his camera footage and erase it because of how violent the defendant was towards Don Clark. He even testified to the defendant once throwing a vase at Don Clark's head. Members of the jury, in the summer of 2017, the defendant was tired of waiting. She became dissatisfied with waiting for that dream to become a reality. You heard from our direct examination how the defendant's plan came to life from Agent Branham. He told you how on May 1st, 2017, Don Clark was convinced to sign over his power of attorney by the defendant herself, and how the defendant made him add a disappearance clause to that document so she wouldn't have to wait long to acquire all of his assets. And what's worse, Don Clark knew that his wife had plans to kill him. He attempted to file a restraining order just 2 months before she killed him. Third, and most important, let's review all of the evidence that shows that the defendant made Don Clark disappear. You also heard from our direct examination of Agent Branham how the defendant had access to a vial of carfentanil and how that vial mysteriously went missing. the day of Don Clark's disappearance. You were also shown by us that the defendant's Elephant Park's van had driven to Big Gum Swamp in the late hours of August 18, 2017, and how there was algae found on that van's driver's side, the Elephant Park's wheelchair, and the defendant's own boots that could be originated from Big Gum Swamp. Members of the jury, it should be clear to you. The defendant used that vial of carfentanil to kill her husband, and since her husband was so large, standing at 6'5" while she was 5'4", she put his body into a wheelchair, proceeded to wheel him to their Chevrolet Express van, and then drive him 139 miles away to Big Gum Swamp, where she dumped his body. The defense could claim that Mr. Clark used his money to travel to Costa Rica, but members of the jury, when Mr. Clark's airplane was found, it wasn't found parked somewhere in Hermosa Beach. It was 5 miles away from the defendant's home. You just saw video footage of the defendant just 2 months after her husband was declared missing. She didn't seem devastated. She seemed happy. She was blissful. Her dreams of owning an elephant sanctuary could finally become a reality. Members of the jury, once you go out to that deliberation room, we are confident that you will do the only thing that is fair and that is just. And you will find the defendant, Kara Bassett, guilty for the murder of Don Clark. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller, your turn.
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to proceed?
Please.
May it please the court, the way the government has presented their version of events, it's as if they want you to believe that Miss Bassett committed the perfect crime. That despite the fact that she was 5'4" and Don Clark was 6'5", she was able to get his body into a wheelchair, move it to a van in just 3 minutes. They want you to believe that she then drove that van to a swamp and dumped Don Clark's body there. But the FBI was never able to find that body. Today you saw this text sent from Mr. Clark's phone at 11:14 p.m. But you learned that the van they're alleging Miss Bassett drove to the swamp left 3 minutes later at 11:17. In just 3 minutes, Miss Bassett would have had to have put Don Clark in that wheelchair, wheel him out to the van, hide the syringe that they mentioned, hide all the physical evidence, make it appear that there was no struggle, no blood, nothing. And members of the jury, I couldn't help but notice that in her summation of the evidence, Miss Morris couldn't tell you how the defendant could have done this in 3 minutes. And that's because they know that they presented you with an impossible crime and are ignoring other reasonable possibilities. And they've also brought a charge impossible to prove. Today, the government has alleged that Miss Bassett murdered her husband, and it's been their job to prove that to you beyond a reasonable doubt, meaning the defendant has been presumed innocent, and she remains presumed innocent, unless they were able to prove their theory in a way that leaves not a single question, doubt, or reasonable explanation for Mr. Clark's disappearance. But not only is there an alternate reasonable explanation, members of the jury, there's a more reasonable explanation. Because Don Clark's disappearance has nothing to do with Miss Bassett and everything to do with his own actions. See, today we told you about 3 things: the clause, the cash, and the call. First, the clause. Now, when I cross-examined the government's witness, Steph Branham, I asked him about this disappearance clause. And now the government has tried to tell you that this clause was added solely at Miss Bassett's direction, and that's true. But they didn't tell you the reason in that letter that Miss Bassett gives. And it was because Don Clark was doing shady business with men in Costa Rica, and she wanted to add that clause in case he disappeared. 4 months later, he disappeared. But flash forward to 14 days before his disappearance, when Don Clark tells his lawyer that he wants to do business in Costa Rica using cash off the books, that he's planning to move assets to Costa Rica, and that he does not want Miss Bassett to find out. Now let's look at this logically, members of the jury. When you use cash off the books to buy something and insist that your wife never finds out, it's to do something you shouldn't. It's to do business with people you probably shouldn't be doing business with. And lastly, the call. We brought a witness to the stand named Joe Young, a TV producer who was filming a documentary on the park. And she told you that the day Mr. Clark went missing, he got a text from an unlisted number in Costa Rica. You heard that he was scared by that text, that his face went sheet white, and then he called that number for an hour, just a few hours before he would disappear. And members of the jury, we even have evidence that Don Clark is still alive. Joe Young took the stand and told you that he went to Don Clark's vacation home, saw that fans were on, the place was spotless, and some of his clothes were in the closet, ladies and gentlemen. Fans don't turn themselves on. The house didn't dust itself. Those clothes didn't put themselves up in the closet. Someone with access to that house had been there recently. And if the government tries to tell you that isn't reasonable doubt, then I don't know what is. That's the evidence we brought you. Now, we didn't have to call a single witness, ask a single question, but we wanted to anyway to show you the possibilities that the government is missing. What about the evidence that they did bring you? They called Agent Branham to the stand, and he said some things that I just couldn't ignore. He immediately started talking about a syringe of carfentanil, which is an elephant tranquilizer. He told you that according to a logbook, one syringe was missing. And then the very next thing he said was that Miss Bassett took it, stabbed her husband with it, and killed him. But members of the jury, where's the physical evidence? Where's the eyewitness testimony that she was fumbling around in that shed of medical supplies? Agent Branham, he just went from point A to point C and skipped point B entirely. And that's not proof beyond all reasonable doubt. But let's say that you go back to the jury room and you find that the connection to Costa Rica doesn't matter. Even so, the impossible details of this crime still remain. Now, they can ask you to believe that the height difference is insignificant. They can ask you to believe that she would have been able to hide his body so well that trained dogs could never find it. Members of the jury, they can even ask you to believe that she sent that text herself at 11:14 p.m. But you can't charge someone for murder and then come into court and base your entire case on ask you to believe after ask you to believe. It was their job to prove this case. Ladies and gentlemen, at worst, their case is impossible. And at best, it's still unreasonable. But neither are proof beyond all reasonable doubt. In a case where your verdict is determined by whether or not they were able to give you a reasonable version of events, the very premise of their case is unreasonable. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, we don't know what happened to Don Clark, and we might never know. But what we do know is this. Because the government couldn't rule out the clause, the cash, and the call, the connection to Costa Rica, because they couldn't tell you how the defendant would have committed this impossible crime, because they told you about a dream that the defendant had and her dissatisfaction, but they haven't told you how she had anything to do with his disappearance, I'm confident that at the end of this trial, just a few moments away, you will soon not just presume Miss Bassett's innocence. You'll find it. Thank you.
And thank you. Ms. Morris, you have the opportunity to rebut.
Yes, Your Honor. Members of the jury, on August 18th, 2017, Don Clark had walked from his living room to his bed, expecting to go to sleep and wake up the next morning. But he did not have that chance. The defense has tried to write off Don Clark's murder as just a simple disappearance. Members of the jury, we do admit that Don Clark disappeared from the world, but that is because of the defendant's own selfish and ruthless action of murdering him and taking a full week to hide his body before she tries to cover her tracks and reports him missing. Members of the jury, find Kara Bassett guilty. Thank you.
Thank you both. Well, if this were in a courtroom, I would call for a round of applause, but you have a constructive round of applause at this point. Scoring attorneys, I'll ask you to complete and submit your ballots. You know, it would be super helpful if you could send me a chat message telling me that you have in fact submitted your ballot, so I can be sure that all three of them are in before we proceed.